Hello, good evening. This is the Al 24 News and to the main headlines. In Sudan, 6 casualties and protesters are still moving forward. A newly expected Tunisian protest over the political and economic crisis in the country. A prison bloody clash in Ecuador resulted in the death of 60 people and 25 injured. First, in our top story, Sudan's activist protests rejecting measures taken by the army chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan continue in Sudan amid international calls for calm at the time when other protesters resulted in 6 casualties and many injuries, according to what was announced by the Central Commitment of Sudan's Doctors, moved to be clarified in Asma reports.
The situation in Sudan is not heading towards calm in light of the army commander Abdel Fattah al-Burhan's ignorance of international calls to respond to the protesters' demands and persistence of civil society activists to force al-Burhan to withdraw his recent decisions. Ongoing protests come for the second day in a row in response to calls by the Sudanese Professionals Association and the resistance committees, hours after the army chief Abdel Fattah al-Burhan announced the formation of a new sovereign council that excludes the union of civilians. The situation soon developed in various Sudanese cities as the security forces closed roads and strategic sites, including the presidential palace, the government headquarters and the airport, according to what was reported by local media and news agencies. Central Sudanese Doctors Committee announced that 6 people were killed and various injuries were recorded during the protests, while the Sudanese police denied the use of real bullets against the demonstrators, confirming that about 40 of its members were injured and its security centers were attacked. It is worth mentioning that head of African Commission Musa Faqih called on Sudanese military authorities to engage without further delay in a political process that leads to the return of constitutional order in the country, at a time when observers of the issue in Sudan see that there is still a long way to go before resolving the political crisis in Sudan.
Tunisian General Labour Union warned of difficult situation in the country at a time when popular activists call for protest demonstration today in the capital. Here it is, Asma again.
It seems that the situation in Tunisia is likely to worsen in light of difficult political, economic and social conditions that Tunisia is experiencing. Activists called for organizing protest demonstrations in the capital Tunis in front of the parliament headquarters to denounce the political impasse and the aggravation of deteriorating economic situation that affected large sections of Tunisian society due to the oppressive economic catastrophe that the country has been experiencing for years. Assistant Secretary General of Tunisian General Labour Union Samir al-Shifi warned that the social situation in the country is very problematic and threatens to cause social explosions. Al-Shifi considered that the union, the largest labor organization in Tunisia, was one of the forces that considered the decisions of the last July 25th were a natural result of the failure of an entire decade and its denial of the revolution's entitlements and objectives of the people in building a just social democratic state, fighting corruption and securing jobs for those who deserve it. Away from the economic crisis, political crises have been escalating in Tunisia since July 25th due to the exceptional measures taken by President Qais Said, which lead to believing that the situation is still far from being resolved.
The Minister of International Relations and Cooperation of the Republic of South Africa, Naledi Pandor, stated that Algeria and South Africa will always work together to overcome all the problems of the African continent, and she emphasized on the idea that South Africa and Algeria will never desert the Palestinians as well as the Western Sahara people. Let's have a listen.
Algeria and South Africa will continue to work closely in all international bodies, particularly in the context of the United Nations, and most importantly, in the context of the African Union. We very strongly believe that as Algeria and South Africa, given the history of our fight against colonialism, that we have an obligation to continue to strive for the self-determination of the people of Western Sahara. We also believe very strongly that we cannot desert the people of Palestine. Not many countries are continuing to strive to ensure that the people of Western Sahara are free and the people of Palestine enjoy freedom and human rights. We will never desert the people of Palestine as South Africa. We will never desert the people of Sahrawi as South Africa, because we believe every human being deserves the right to enjoy freedom and autonomy.
For his part from Mohammed, the Algerian foreign minister affirmed that Algeria and South Africa are two countries that defend the rights of people to freedom and everything related to interests of the African continent. Let's have a listen again.
Algeria and the Republic of South Africa raised their voices together when it comes to defending the Palestinian cause and the Western Sahara cause, and all what supports the interests of the African continent and building a strong, solid, and independent Africa. An Africa that thinks, plan, and execute the African solutions to the African problems with complete independence and freedom.
Within the economic sector, the Algerian Prime Minister Ayman Abdelrahman affirmed that his country has embarked on important and unprecedented political economic reforms in an effort to promote investment and advance all sectors. The Algerian Prime Minister, in a speech he delivered during the celebration of commemoration of Algeria Day at the Expo Dubai, expressed that Algeria's readiness to deepen and strengthen its relationship with the United Arab Emirates, especially in the field of investment, in order to achieve their common aspiration for further growth in a manner that employs their enormous capacities, as he says.
The Algerian pavilion at the exhibition, which is located in the transitional area, takes its visitors in a life journey from the south to the north, shedding the light on very important historical stations that reflects the anthropological deepness of Algeria. Algeria that witnessed the dawn of humanity, incubating in Ain Boucherit, a 2.4 million-year-old artifact and stone tool to truly be the cradle of humanity. The pavilion also highlights Algeria's most important touristic sites and locations, and also its diversity of cultural and artistic expressions, which enriches the cultural and tourism radiation, not only by promoting its image, but also contributing in the success of Dubai exhibition.
The Algerian Prime Minister considered that the Algerian pavilion is too large to be summarized as a site to cultural and tourism radiation, but rather to contribute to highlight the prospects and aspirations of Algerians for the future.
My country, Algeria, has embarked on unprecedented political and economic reforms under the leadership of the President of the Republic, Abdelmajid Tebboune, using both material and human resources in order to promote investment, develop the economy, and advance all sectors in order to reach its strategic goals, focusing on strategic partners such as the United Arab Emirates, that has diverse and rich economic relations with Algeria.
In the same line of thought, the Algerian Prime Minister Ayman bin Abdelrahman announced his country's intention to abandon comprehensive support for basic materials and commodities by resorting to monetary and selective support. Zara Farjani reports.
Rebalancing the state budget and ensuring the continuity of public spending without compromising the support directed to vulnerable groups is a challenge to the Algerian government by launching radical reforms of the subsidy policy directed at controlling the prices of some basic commodities.
We included an amount of money of 1,942 billion Algerian dinar in Finance Law 2022. There is no doubt that the government will continue to provide social support and accompany the middle classes, and we hope that this support will be more effective this time. This support is directed to the families that you will define together. Also, the comprehensive support will be transferred to cash support.
A step justified by the Algerian Prime Minister with the government's effort to reduce expenditures and achieve efficiency in directing about $17 billion annually to the groups and families in need. Not to mention curbing the growing phenomenon of smuggling subsidized materials across the border.
We will not accept that this support, which is $17 billion, be directed to people who do not deserve it, who are sabotaging the national economy and who want to continue looting it.
Launching a comprehensive and accurate census to draw a map of the groups and individuals involved in the new support mechanism precedes abandoning comprehensive support and moving towards selective cash support, an effort that the Algerian government paved the way for, including an item in the state budget draft for the next year.
The head of the Libyan High Council of State, Khaled al-Masari, suggested postponing the election schedule for the end of the next December 3 months in order to agree on the law, and al-Masri said in a statement on a sideline of the press conference held in Istanbul that he will not participate in the elections and will not obstruct them. Zahra again.
All Libyans aspire to reach the state of institutions and ending the division in the country to get Libya out of the chaos it is experiencing as a result of international tensions, a process that depends on the elections scheduled for the end of next December. However, the differences between the Supreme Council and Parliament persist due to the controversial election law.
There are parties who refuse to hold elections in accordance with these laws, and therefore al-Mashri represents this point of view. And he has been trying politically for a while to mobilize political support for his point of view, which sees the need to postpone the elections for a certain period until full consensus is reached.
Analysts attributed the international pressure on the necessity of holding the Libyan elections on the 24th next December to several points, the most important of which is the consensus of the active countries in Libya to preserve their interests in the region.
There is international pressure on the necessity of holding the elections on time. Therefore, this pressure has begun to materialize some results, as it's evident in the Paris conference, which emphasized the holding of the elections on time.
Khaled al-Mashri's statements were preceded by the United States threat on the tongue of its ambassador to Libya, Richard Noland, to punish those he described as election obstructionists.
Saif al-Islam al-Qaddafi, the son of the former Libyan leader Muammar al-Qaddafi, today registered to run in the next month's presidential election. The nomination is seen as an important step towards helping the country open a new chapter to end the crisis that has been dragging on for the past decades. Libya's first presidential election, with the first round on December 24th, is the conclusion of a process launched last year by the United Nations to end a series of violence since al-Qaddafi-led government was overthrown in 2011. Nigerian army members were killed in an attack held by the IS-linked group in the Askira Uba area of Borno State. The attack put 3 soldiers and an army general to death. Usama Iyadi reports.
According to the Nigerian Army's last statement to Saturday, 3 soldiers and an army general were killed in an IS-linked extremist group attack. The army members were killed in the Askira Uba region in the state of Borno, which is the center of rebellion in the country for more than a decade. Many Nigerian public buildings were burned down due to the attack. A primary healthcare center and many public structures were destroyed by the extremist rebellious group. On his behalf, Nigerian army spokesman declared that the army troops have responded to the attack and several members of IS-linked groups were killed. These insurgencies give clear sign that Islamic State-linked groups are still active in Africa's northeastern area, and they remain a serious threat in the region. Despite the repeated claims of the Nigerian army of realizing large success in fighting extremist groups of the Islamic State in West Africa province, which lost 2 of its leaders in army clashes during the last few months. Islamic State in West Africa province split from Boko Haram since 2016, but the extremist rebels remained united against Nigerian government, which on its part has expanded its existence to neighboring countries. Africa's northeastern region is still under the threat of extremist groups and insurgencies, and these last attacks reveal the activity of these rebels, although they have recently lost 2 important figures, Abu Mus'ab al-Barnawi and his successor Malam Baku, but the Nigerian military is still targeted.
Clashes in Hodeidah city erupted on Saturday and Houthi rebellious groups entered the city after the withdrawal of government forces from the region. This comes after the ceasefire deal that took place in 2018 between the 2 warring sides in the region. More to be clarified in this report.
Yemeni crisis is still in the rise, and tension between internationally recognized government forces and Houthi forces escalated. Al-Hodeidah city witnessed Saturday violent clashes between the 2 rival forces in the country. Houthi rebels attacked the region and rounded up dozens of residents of the city, accusing them for supporting the government. This attack came after internationally recognized government forces withdrew from the area. According to a UN mission observing the ceasefire, Houthi rebels re-entered the evacuated region after the joint forces stepped out of it. Yemen's war started when Houthi rebels took over the capital city of Sana'a in 2014 and still occupy most of the country's northern part, while Saudi-led coalition entered the war in 2015, aiming to restore the government and expel the rebels. The beginning of fights in Hodeidah erupted in 2018, when government forces supported by Saudi-led coalition settled in the region and took control of it. After months of military clashes, a ceasefire deal was imposed on both warring sides, and finally they exchanged more than 15,000 prisoners. The conflict has since become a regional war, and millions are suffering because of it. It took thousands of lives and left endless numbers of refugees, injured civilians, and fighters.
An explosion of minibus on a popular commercial area in Kabul killed 6 people and injured at least 7 more on Saturday. The explosion took place in Shia-dominated zone. More details over this accident in this report.
6 people were killed, among which a very well-known journalist, and at least 7 were wounded, Saturday in a bus explosion in western Kabul. The journalist was identified as Hamid Tirani, who worked for the mainstream television station Ariana. The explosion occurred by installing a magnetic bomb in the passenger bus. It took place in the Dashti Barchi area of western Kabul. No one has yet claimed responsibility for the attack. Yet, Dashti Barchi has a large Shia Muslim ethnic Hazara population, which has been repeatedly targeted by the Islamic State militants. The militants carried out several deadly attacks at Dashti Barchi, including an attack on a maternity hospital in 2020. Violence occurred near the Taliban checkpoint in the capital of Afghanistan. It is worth mentioning that last week at least 19 people, including a senior Taliban leader, were killed and 50 others were wounded in an ISIS attack on Kabul National Military Hospital.
In Europe, the Bulgarian citizens are heading to the polls to elect a new parliament and new president. New third poll in EU that comes after massive protests aiming to change the political situation in the country. Nabil reports.
After 2 inconclusive general elections in April and July, Bulgarians seek through the new elections amid the surge of coronavirus infections to elect a new parliament and a new president. A step forward for around 7 million voters to elect 240 lawmakers, a move that may result in a government that will lead the European Union's poorest member out of economic crisis. No political party is expected to win an outright majority in the November 14 parliamentary elections, opening the door to more difficult coalition talks in a deeply divided parliament. However, opinion polls suggest Borisov's Citizens for European Development of Bulgaria (CEDB) party will be the one that wins the most seats in the National Assembly. Bulgaria knew 100 consecutive days of widespread anti-corruption protests last year that made Boyko Borisov step down after more than a decade as prime minister. Protests in Bulgaria continued as hundreds of anti-vaccine protesters joined some political leaders in Sofia to demonstrate against Bulgaria's decision to make COVID-19 certificate mandatory for access to public spaces.
After the newly lockdown that was imposed by the Dutch government due to the surge of the COVID-19 pandemic lately, many protesters in Leeuwarden decided to stand against the new decision, while the police have arrested more than 15 people because of these protests. Islam Said on What Follow.
Videos showed protesters blowing up fireworks after the new procedures that was taken by the Dutch government, which required 3-week partial lockdown on Saturday after a surge in the number of people testing positive for COVID-19. 15 people have been arrested after hundreds went on against the new decision, and a riot broke out in the Dutch city of Leeuwarden on Saturday night. The Northern Netherlands police unit said many people refused to return back to their homes. Local media reported that under the new 3-week COVID-19 lockdown, restaurants and supermarkets must close at 8 p.m. and stores vending needless items have to close at 6 p.m. The decision includes sports as well, in which professional football matches have to be played in empty stadiums. Social separation measures have been reinstalled as part of the lockdown, which is the first in Western Europe since a new wave of infections began spreading throughout the continent. It's worth mentioning that Johns Hopkins University reported that Netherlands has seen over than 2 million COVID-19 cases and 19,138 deaths since the pandemic began.
To the South American continent, a bloody clash at an Ecuador prison left more than 60 inmates dead and another 25 injured. The clash between gangs in Ecuador prisons is not the first to happen these last couple of months. More to be clarified in this report.
At least 68 prisoners died in a prolonged gun battle between rival gangs inside Ecuador's largest prison early Saturday. The fighting lasted for almost 8 hours in the lockup in the coastal city of Guayaquil. The repetitive prison brawls in the Ecuadorian lockups pushed Ecuador's President Guillermo Lasso to declare a state of emergency for the country's penitentiaries last month in order to free up resources and to increase control inside prisons.
The national government has taken immediate actions. First, the state of emergency is declared in the prison system in order to mobilize all the human and economic resources necessary to reestablish order. Secondly, a military control has been established in the access to the jail center in Filter 1, a police control in Filter 2 and 3, and thus practically a total control in the prison center.
Police entered the compound and found a rifle, explosives, 2 pistols and blades. The prison of Penitenciaria del Litoral knew a similar bloodshed months ago when 119 inmates were killed, becoming Ecuador's most violent prison. Ecuador's prisons currently accommodate about 9,000 more prisoners than they were designed to hold, officials say. The literal penitentiary prison was designed for around 5,000 inmates, but currently holds more than 8,000.
As New Delhi is marked as one of the most polluted cities around the globe, the air quality has witnessed a remarkable decline due to the various industrial factors, including intense transport and factories emissions. Here is Islam in this report.
Air in Delhi is worsened day by day since the city is classified among the world's most contaminated towns by crop stubble burning, emissions from transport, coal-fired plants outside the city, and other industrial aspects. New Delhi schools are meant to shut down periodically along with the building sites, while authorities attempt to keep people away from worsening air pollution crisis. Some citizens of New Delhi are forced to wear masks at home, which may force the city to implement a 2-day lockdown to protect its people. According to the Federal Pollution Control Board, healthy people will be affected by the pollution, but the serious impact will be on those with chronic diseases. The chief minister of New Delhi said there might be a possible way for a complete lockdown, which can be as well underway, but that decision would only come after consulting central government. He added that for a week from Monday onwards, schools will be physically closed but will continue virtually so that children don't have to breathe polluted air. On the other hand, construction activities not to be allowed. All government offices would shift to home working, and private offices advised to follow suit to limit vehicles on the road.
Even as a coal-independent countries launched last-minute objection, the United Climate Talks finished Saturday with a deal that for the first time called out fossil fuels as the primary cause of global warming. Marwa reports.
While the deal received applause for keeping the possibility of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius alive, many of the nearly 200 national delegations wished they had achieved more. The two-week conference in Scotland achieved a major victory in addressing the regulations concerning carbon markets, but it did nothing to ease vulnerable countries' concerns about long-promised climate funding from rich nations. Reaching a deal was always a matter of balancing the demands of climate-vulnerable nations, big industrial powers, and those like India and China dependent on fossil fuel to lift their economies and populations out of poverty.
I also understand the deep disappointment. But I think, as you have noted, it's also vital that we protect this package.
The agreement promised to double adaptations funds by 2025, yet there are no guarantees, after which countries failed to reach a 2020 deadline for the payments. A United Nations committee will report next year on progress toward providing the $100 billion per year in promised climate funding. The deal left many vulnerable countries desperate despite a promise made in the 1992 United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. Rich nations have resisted assuming financial responsibility for years for emissions which have caused climate change as they have climbed to economic prosperity. While the Glasgow Agreement outlined a roadmap to tackling the problem by establishing a new secretariat dedicated to the issue, vulnerable countries complained that this was the bare minimum of responsibility.
Well, to be more, have a clarification about this topic. Joining me live, Mr. Dr. Khalid Shawana. Hello and welcome with us.
Hello, sir. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. You are much more appreciated. Mr. Shawana, the direct question is, despite the deals has been already made, let me say since 6 years now, there is no solutions. What can you say about this co-climate?
Let me say first that what you say is relevant. No one can disagree with what you say. You know, this COP26 is a big deal for humanity, as 200 countries attended the conference in Glasgow and took part in debates about the pollution of our planet. However, global warming is affecting the Earth significantly. No one can deny that fact. You know, there is a UN report that finds that global warming will rise by 2.7 degrees Celsius unless richer countries, USA, China, and EU nations, among many others, reduce emissions by 45% in 2030. This is a big deal. So in my view, it is necessary to sound the alarm again and take effective measures for the safety of our planet.
Well, I can agree with you to some points, but to be honest with you, there is always some circumstances that push people to disagree with the deal that has already been made. Let me say the countries that they are considered as poor countries, why they are considered within these deals.
Mm-hmm. Okay, yes, it's not fair, you know, that poor countries are not polluting as richer countries. You know, there is, in philosophy, there is one branch that is called ethics. It is the science of what is right and what is wrong that was founded by Plato, the very famous philosopher. And I think that there is one rule: the more you pollute, the more you pay. And therefore, how come that third world countries who do not or which do not pollute are going to be sanctioned and punished as very developed countries? And this is a very big issue. I totally agree with you. Yeah.
Well, as a last question, do you think that the responsibility between the well-developed countries and the others are shared fairly?
No, not at all. And this is, again, the problem. Really, humanity needs to sit down on the table of give and take and discuss seriously about the future of our planet. What they can do, in my point of view, is that I'm talking about the developed countries, is that they can give us a hand, third world countries, by, let's say, they give to third world countries, let's say, the technologies that they have to develop green policies to become green and eco-friendly to our planet. You know, this is a win-win deal. And by the end of the day, the Earth will be the winner. I mean, all of us, regardless where we live. In short, humanity needs to develop a political will, you know, to make sure our future generations will live in a safe planet. And that's it.
Dr. Khaled, thank you so much for being with us. We catch you later, inshallah.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Ending up with for the fifth round of the qualification for the Qatar 2022 World Cup in Africa Group League in Qatar has been surprising results for some teams, which intensively the race to the final round that will be faithful before going to the second step, the playoff stage. Hussam in this report.
The results of the fifth round of the African qualifying group stage of the playoff match to qualify for the Qatar 2022 World Cup were inconclusive before the last meeting, which for several teams will have to play. The risk of missing out on the most important international football gathering will threaten all teams with equal points. Ivory Coast and Cameroon in Group D will play a very difficult match to win the group leadership. As for the Tunisian team, which lost against Equatorial Guinea, will be required to win the last match against Zambia. Other teams that have not yet qualified need to tie points to cross into the decisive match, like the Algerian national team against its runner-up Burkina Faso. The same is true for Nigeria against its runner-up, as well as the Cape Verde Islands team. Things have not yet been resolved in the African continent, and the competition will reach its peak in the last round, which will witness strong clashes whose result is difficult to predict.
To this end, ladies and gentlemen, let's have a reminder to our main top stories. In Sudan, 6 casualties and protesters still moving forward. A newly expected Tunisian protest over the political and economic crisis in the country. A prison bloody clash in Ecuador resulted in the death of 60 people and 25 injured. Thank you so much for being with us, ladies and gentlemen. Catch you tomorrow. Good night. Bye-bye.